let's talk about the story of Red, the history of Red as of September 2020. I did a video like this a while ago, and there have been a lot of changes since, and I gotta say, I have not kept up to date with Red day in and day out over the last 10 to 15 years. No, it's something I check in from time to time. I don't own a Red, but I do like to stay in the know on this kind of stuff because I find the company fascinating. If you don't know about Red, this is probably for you. And if you do know about Red, hey, sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. We're going to start at the beginning. The Red Digital Cinema Camera Company was founded in 2005 by Jim Gennard of Oakley. And he did it because he just wanted to make some awesome film cameras, digital film cameras that were cheap at the time. Red nowadays is known as being very expensive, but at the time, Red was kind of undercutting the digital cinema market by offering cameras that were ridiculously cheap in comparison to their other digital cinema equivalents. Nowadays, it's very expensive compared to hybrids and other of the really cheap, $2,000 or $3,000 cinema cameras. But at the time, that was Red. They were the pioneers in that space. The whole beginnings of Red kind of revolved around this 4K versus 2K, or 2K you could also think of as basically 1080p. And which did you need? Did you need 4K, or was 1080p enough? Was 2K really all the eye could see, or was 4K valuable? And there was a lot of arguments and discussions and debates at the time about which was better. Do you need the resolution? Do you need the dynamic range? Is it the color science? Like what is the thing? And Red's thing was 4K RAW. They pioneered that. They said it was the most important thing ever. And as we know now, the industry has kind of caught up to that. But back in 2005, and then in 2007, when the first camera finally came out, this was kind of revolutionary and groundbreaking to just even consider 4K RAW. Why would anyone need that? Do you need it? There's plenty of films that are shot digitally at 1080p. And it's no. If you want to be digital film, you have to have the resolution and you have to have the flexibility in post-production of RAW to really make the most of it. And so this concept of digital film, trying to emulate film digitally in terms of the dynamic range, in terms of the resolution, was all central to the Red philosophy. You had initial early adopters like Peter Jackson, Steven Soderbergh, and David Fincher, who gravitated to these cameras and used them basically right from the beginning and really got behind the company in a way that put Red on the map rather than just being this cool camera company that makes cool products. There were professional Hollywood directors who adopted the system and switched from film. We still have a few holdouts who are still shooting film, but nowadays, most Hollywood movies are shot digitally, which again, back in 2005 and early on, that was not the case. This was very, very different workflow, both literally in terms of the workflow, but also from the philosophy of how do you produce a movie. Another thing I should mention here is reduser.net. If you want to live and breathe Red cameras, go over to reduser.net. If you want to take a look at what it looks like if you've never been here before, Red User looks basically the way I've always remembered it looking. I don't think they've changed this forum basically forever. But if you want the inside access, direct to Red, talk to other people who are Red users, this is where you want to be. And it's actually a really helpful space for just understanding filmmaking, cinematography, and camera technology in general. And it's kind of a unique, cool place. It definitely has a lot of people who love Red cameras. So if you hate Red, probably don't go there. But if you want to know a little bit more about Red and really dive in deep, because what I'm going to be talking about is very, very high level. If you want to get into the weeds, go over to Red User because that's where it's at. So in 2007, Red finally releases the Red 1, which is the Mysterium sensor. That was the first sensor in the first camera body, the Red 1. And you can see there in the background, the Red 1 was a tank, or maybe more like a bazooka. This thing was big, it was heavy, and it was kind of a pain to work with. It had overheating issues, it had a lot of bugs and quirks that, it's the first product from this company doing some pretty incredible things, and it wasn't as loved and cherished by as many people as you might think for how popular Red has become over the years. The Red 1 was a mixed bag. People definitely loved it, but other people found it really tiresome and irritating to have to work with, and so they opted for other camera solutions. But it definitely was the first thing giving us this 4K RAW workflow that set the pace for everything moving forward. A lot of the problems with the Red 1 were immediately taken into development for Red's next products. So in 2010, taking all those lessons from the Red 1, they upgrade the Red 1 with the Mysterium X sensor, so giving a better sensor to Red 1 users. And this is kind of an interesting thing that Red does. They kind of offer these upgrade programs where you might have a camera, but then you can get it upgraded for significantly cheaper than someone who's buying it brand new. So they really try and give their customers kind of this like loyalty discount, and taking advantage of older cameras and still making them new and relevant when they do come out with new upgrades. And it's not as universal or as often as you might like, but it's kind of that thing if you had like an iPhone 9 and then, which an iPhone 9 doesn't even exist, but if you had an iPhone 10 and then an iPhone 11 comes out and it's like, okay, we'll give your iPhone 10 not only just the user interface and the software, but like we'll actually switch out, you take it to the Apple Store and we'll switch out the cameras and we'll give you the better camera or something like that. That's sort of the philosophy of Red, that these things can be upgraded as things change over time. But Mysterium X was a bigger phenomenon because of the Epic X. So in 2010, this is when Red coined this term DSMC, Digital Stills and Motion Capture, cameras that are meant for both photo and video. Basically what we call hybrids nowadays, but they were talking about it as DSMC back in 2010. And with the Epic X, with the Mysterium X sensor, that was their goal, that was their vision, to be able to have such high resolution cameras that they would make amazing cinema, but you could also pull, high resolution raw images for photography from those same cameras. And if you wanted to do a photo shoot for a magazine, you could do it with an Epic, or if you wanted to shoot a movie, you could also do it with an Epic. In 2011, they debuted the Scarlet X, which was kind of the smaller, not actually smaller, but just the cheaper, more affordable, more economy version of the Epic. It couldn't do as much in terms of frame rates, but it was basically like a little mini Epic, not quite as good, but kind of like a downgrade. But for the people who wanted the more affordable solution, that was the Scarlet. But it was interesting at the same time, Canon introduced, Cinema EOS with the C300, and the C300 and the Scarlet X were announced the same day for basically very similar pricing. I mean, there is some differences with accessories and whatnot, but for basically the same price on the same day, these things were announced as being kind of available and like the full specs, released. These two cameras went head to head, and Canon at the time was kind of laughed at for the C300 being so under-spec'd compared to the Scarlet. But once you count in accessories and workflow, and now that we've seen what Cinema EOS has become, we know that the C300 was a very popular camera and did great things, at least from my assumption, for Canon, and Scarlet did good things for Red as well. But what seemed to be, equal competition and competitors in the same space, I think ended up kind of diverging more or less. The Red ecosystem and workflow is very different from, the people who might gravitate towards more of like the Canon C300 or C500 type shooting. So while they do look like they're kind of basically, direct competition, and they are in some ways, I think they end up diverging a little bit more than you might first assume. And it's interesting to see how far these companies have come, today, where Red is very clearly in one space, and then the Cinema EOS stuff is kind of in another. And it's just kind of interesting. I don't think people really relate them as much as maybe they did at the time back in 2011. In 2012, the Epic X got the Dragon 6K sensor upgrade. You'll notice we started with 4K RAW, now we've got 6K RAW with the Dragon sensor in the Epic X. So same form factor, same camera body, but upgraded with this new sensor that is, of course, better, higher resolution, better dynamic range, etc., etc., etc. In 2013, Scarlet X gets the Dragon sensor upgrade as well. Not as high frame rates, but same kind of philosophy. You have a camera body that you bought, and for not as much as it would cost to buy it new, you can upgrade the sensor in it, which is the Mysterium X sensor. You can take that to the Dragon sensor. But the Dragon sensor wouldn't work in a Red 1, let's say. So you kind of have that, This is where Red kind of started confirming or conceptualizing this idea that a body's released and then a sensor's released and then a body's released and then a sensor is released, and there'll always be kind of like this one generation overlap where you can kind of take the sensor, put it in the old body, but then the new body will come out and then a new sensor will come out and that sensor will go to that body. Kind of this, I don't know how to describe that, the stair-stepping or waterfalling, some sort of philosophy where there's an upgrade path, and intentionally releasing bodies and sensors separately is kind of when they started to put this on their roadmap as if like this is their plan, what they're going to be doing moving forward with DSMC. So in 2015, they announced DSMC2. So as we said, the Dragon sensor came out, so now it's time for the new body. So this is DSMC2, and this is a hardware and accessories redesign featuring the established Dragon sensor. So take the Dragon sensor, new body. And this was kind of coined as being weapon. Red has always had this thing where they name their stuff really cool names like Epic and Dragon and Weapon, and they kind of get in trouble sometimes. They had an EVF at one point that said bomb on the side of it, so people were getting pulled over by TSA and airports because they're saying, why do you have something in your case that says bomb on it? Yeah, kind of a slight misstep, but they always like to do that kind of cool, edgy stuff. And I think that's what's worked so well for Red over the years is that their marketing, their branding, so much of the Red cameras is just about the style of the company and the vibe that it gives you, where a company like Blackmagic or Canon or Sony, they're kind of stiff and corporate, where Red is definitely more of like the underdog, the rebel, and they do it with how they name their products and just the visual like imagery on their site, and they have cameras with skulls on them. Like this is the style of the company, and I think it speaks really strongly to certain people who want that cool factor in their equipment. I can't really think of another, camera company, at least at the time, back then, doing this kind of thing, like making the camera itself this cool, visually attractive, fun thing that you just, when you hold it, it makes you feel a certain way because it's cool. It's like a weapon. It's like, it's almost giving you an upgrade as a shooter just by having this thing that's really cool, like a really nice car, that's advertised as being sporty and luxurious and amazing and beautiful and sleek and designed. And Red was putting that effort into cameras, which was kind of also a new, interesting concept. Scarlett W would have the Dragon sensor as well. So this is what kind of kicked off DSMC2, is the Scarlett WW, standing for weapon. And then around this time, there was also the Red Raven, which had a 4.5K Dragon sensor. And the Raven kind of came and went pretty quickly. They were sold through Apple. It was meant as this kind of even cheaper entry point into the Red ecosystem, but I don't think they really sold all that well. You can definitely find them used nowadays, but it's not a product that they've continued or really gets talked about anymore. It came and went pretty quick, as well as some other Red. There was going to be Red Ray at one point, like Blu-ray, but Red Ray, to where you could play, 4K R3D RAW files on your TV, and that just never came to anything. I think they were going to do a laser projector at one point, that never came out. Red is kind of notorious for some things being vaporware and other things actually being real, and so it's really hard to tell like what's coming, what's not. Scarlett at one point, the amazing, Scarlett was supposed to be 3K for 3K, and it definitely wasn't. It was more like, I forget what it came out as, like 4K for 6K or 9K or something like that. It was around that, definitely higher than what it was initially supposed to be. So they like to change their plans all the time over there at Red based on things not working out. And I think the Red Raven was kind of like that. I'm sure they're great cameras. I'm sure people use them, but just not a hot seller over there at the Apple store, I don't think, anyway. In 2016, we had the Epic W, which had the new helium sensor. So this is an 8K Super 35 sensor. Better, faster, better dynamic range, all that stuff. Things just keep getting better. Things keep getting expensive, more expensive, but they keep getting better. So now we're up to 8K RAW from a Super 35 sensor. Pretty incredible, but also, it costs you a pretty penny as well. 2017, We got the new Monstro 8K Vista Vision sensor. So we went from Super 35. Now there's a Monstro sensor. Its claim to fame is that it's over 17 stops of dynamic range. This thing is a beast, but it's also incredibly expensive. 2018, they got the new Gemini sensor upgrade, and Gemini features dual ISO. So it's a smaller resolution, 5K sensor, but it's really good in low light, having that dual ISO. That's become more and more common on a lot of cameras, like the Lumix S1H and S5, as well as I believe the Sony a7S III has something similar, but it might not. But this dual ISO, so that you can shoot in the dark. And Gemini, if you don't know, is one of the 12 signs of the zodiac, and its a symbol is a pair of twins. So kind of making sense with dual ISO, like two different ISOs, twin ISOs. Kind of a nice little, if you ever forget which sensor, which camera body, at least you can remember Gemini is the one that has dual ISO, because you know what Gemini means. So here we are in 2020, and I feel like up until this point, Red made a huge splash at the beginning, got really big, and then has kind of been trickling down ever since. For whatever reason, that's just at least my impression. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but it's been so much in Hollywood that it's just become, okay, these are filmmaker cameras, and yes, you know, these directors, they're going to have 50 of them on set because their budgets are ridiculous, but for day-to-day people who are, you know, they're going to spend $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 on a camera, and then it's going to be upgraded in a year or two, and it's like, it's this investment. I think there's definitely some people that it makes sense for you know, productions, but as hybrid technology in cameras has become a lot more common, a lot more ubiquitous, you've got Canon and Sony and Panasonic and Blackmagic Design, and you even have oddballs like the Zcam or Kinefinity. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of companies in this space making a lot of different products at a lot of different price points. And you definitely have a lot of popularity with the low end market, the kind of consumer market where things are $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000. But Red has always been up there and kind of out of reach and seemingly like very, very high end, very professional. They, in fact, at one point said they were intentionally leaning into that of Red will never be, you know, the kind of consumer camera you can get at Best Buy. It will always be this elite level product. So now in 2020, we get the Komodo 6K Super 35 camera for $6,000. 6K for 6K. Hey, they finally did it. Not 3K for 3K, but it's 6K for 6K. And the Komodo does have a new sensor, and that is body only. There's, of course, accessories that go along with it that are going to make it more expensive. But for $6,000, you, for the first time, have this very low entry point into the Red ecosystem with a camera that has a lot built right in. You would want to rig it out with a few extra bells and whistles, but for the most part, the Red cameras have always been these kind of modular systems where you buy the brain and then you got to bolt all this other stuff onto it, and it just the costs add up really quick. The Komodo is a little bit different. It's meant to be that kind of buy it and it's basically all there and you can do almost everything you would want, and it's only $6,000. And there are a lot of people who've bought these that are really loving them. They're still technically kind of in a beta program. Like I said, if you want to know all the detail, go over to Red User, because that's where you can find the actual nitty-gritty specifics of when these things were actually available, because you can't buy them from the Red site right now. You can't go buy a Komodo right now. It's kind of limited access only. But it is cool that they're catering to this kind of lower end of the market by still offering a camera that is really high end in terms of features and kind of the footage that you're able to capture with it. But a camera isn't going to do everything. If you're filming something ugly, it's going to look ugly. Doesn't matter how beautiful the camera is. The subject of what's being filmed matters as well. We also, just to kind of set in place where everything shakes out with the DSMC 2 line, because you can buy all these cameras right now and they all have all different flavors and price points and etc. But this is where things currently stand. So there's the Dragon X, which is a 6K Super 35 sensor for roughly $15,000. You've got the Gemini 5K, remember that's the dual ISO one, Super 35 sensor, that's $20,000, give or take, plus accessories for all these. These are just base price points, right? Helium 8K now, Super 35 sensor, that's $25,000, so more resolution, but not as good low light. And then the Monstro 8K Vista Vision, big sensor, $54,000 just for the base package. That's the current DSMC that's the current DSMC 2 lineup. And to make it even more confusing, there's also the Ranger models. So a little bit, you can see it in the background there, there's a Ranger, a little bit different form factor, different body style, and you can see that the prices are, you know, a Gemini 5K Super 35 Ranger is $25,000 compared to a DSMC 2 Gemini 5K is $20,000. So about a $5,000 upgrade for more of the features that come in the Ranger body, but those are less kind of modular and more like single unit than the DSMC 2 cameras, but same sensors. And that's kind of where it all shakes out at this point. Of course, you have things like the Red Hydrogen, the Red phone, the smartphone Red made that was supposed to be, you know, the cinema smartphone that came and went pretty quick. I'll probably do another video on the Red Hydrogen because I think it deserves its own video all on its own. But that's something that they tried back in 2018, I believe. And I don't think there's going to be a Hydrogen 2 or any other Red smartphone for that matter. So it's interesting to see the evolution of Red from way back in 2005 when it was just this kind of dream and vision, and where we are now in 2020 having these incredible offerings in the cinema space, and really how much they did change filmmaking. Digital cinema was incredibly expensive and really not all that great before Red. And Red has really pushed those boundaries and pushed those limits, pushing for things like 4K RAW, pushing resolution higher and higher and higher for maximum quality, while still not losing sight of things like dynamic range and loyalty to their customers and their fan base. I think it's a pretty cool company, even though they like to talk about themselves as being cool all the time by having products named Weapon and Dragon and Epic and Monstro. They do a good job marketing, and they definitely have a cool style and a vibe. I've never bought a Red camera. I've shot with Red cameras before. They're great, but they also have their little quirks and their oddities, and they're definitely not for everybody. It's not like you're going to get a Red and somehow become a cinematographer, award-winning cinematographer overnight. You're going to be the same. The camera's just going to be better, but it's really always up to the individual to use the tool to the best of their ability. And maybe a Red is an opportunity to get better at your own skill set. But if you're looking at the Komodo or you're looking at any other Red camera, don't think that just by buying it and because it says Red on it, that it's somehow going to make you amazing. No, your skills and your talents are what they are. And you might have a camera that's a little bit better of a tool, but it's still up to you to make the most of it and upgrade your personal skills. That's going to make far more of an impact on your footage than just having a more expensive or better camera that has the name Red on the side.